Okay, Rabbi Say, welcome back. The Lomdus and Halacha of coffee. Here we go. This is going to be geschmack. Let's go for it. Now, what's the bracha on drinking coffee? Right? Obvious. Shahakal, right? Why are you asking? Yeah, you guessed it. May not be so obvious. Let's get involved. So the Gemara in Brachas, which is brought in the Shulchan Aruch, there might be a shach that argues, but simple Shulchan Aruch says that if you cook vegetables in water, and then you drink the water, even without the vegetables, the bracha on the water is Bari Pri Adama. Oh, but it's just water. However, since the water was received from the vegetables, they became, so to speak, bottled to the vegetables, they received the liquid form of the vegetables, the bracha on that water is Bari Pri Hadama. So that water, or what we would call soup, would be Hadama. Now, the water takes on the identity of the vegetables. I guess that's the Lomdus way of presenting it. Now, isn't that seemingly what happens by coffee? The water takes on the identity of the coffee bean. And the coffee bean, by the way, big surprise to a lot of people that never knew this, a coffee bean isn't a bean, even though it has bean in coffee bean. There's something called a coffee cherry, which grows on trees. And the pit of the coffee cherry looks a lot like a bean, and it's what we call a coffee bean. But it's actually, it grows on trees, and therefore the bracha would be ha'etz, not adama. So, isn't the water really take on the identity of the coffee cherry, or the coffee bean? And therefore the bracha should be Bari Pri Ha'etz, right? Sounds very simple, sounds like it's the same thing. Because that's really what happens by coffee. The same thing happens by tea. And tea should just as well be Adama. This is getting confusing, huh? Okay, let's find out. But we all know, right? Let's face it. We all know the minhag is, by coffee, you don't make no eitz. By tea, you don't make Adama. You make a shahakal. So what's going on? So the Bottom Iris writes that he once went to Worms, and he saw the Goyin of Shmuel Shatin, who was the grandfather of the Chassam Sofer. He saw him take his tea, actually, and with all the kavunas toivis, he went and made Bari Pri Adama. He made an Adama on his tea. What's going on? So the Panam Iris asked Rav Shmuel Shatin, "My hi, what are you making Adama on a tea?" And Rav Shmuel Shatin said this svara. Listen, the Chamar bracha says that the water that comes from boiling up vegetables is hadama. So too is the water for boiling up tea leaves. It's hadama. What is the difference? Now the Paramiris concludes that the Paramiris asked on Shmuel Shatin, but that's not the minhag. So Shmuel Shatin said it's a minhag tois. It was a mistake. The people the first people that had tea, they weren't learned, and they made a mistake. And a minhag b'tois is not binding. A minhag that's based on a mistake is not binding, and therefore the bracha is hadama. Now, there's an old question: why do we make shahakal on beer? Right? I don't think Bisman Gemara. It sounds like they didn't have coffee, and it sounds like they didn't have tea. Bisman Gemara. But one thing that they did have Bisman Gemara is beer. You got to have a beer. Right? So, what's the bracha on beer? Everybody knows. Shahakal. And apparently, even Bisman Gemara, the bracha on beer was shahakal. Now, the Rush, among other Rishonim, asks, why is the bracha on beer shahakal? Surely, it's just like the Gemara in Brachas. And just like we say the liquid that comes from cooked up vegetables is hadama, so too the liquid that comes up, nowadays we primarily make beer from barley, but back then the Bisman Gemara apparently was from wheat. So when you cook up that wheat, the water should take on the identity of the wheat, and it should be a mezainis, the beer. Why in the world are we making a shahakal? And the Rush explains that if they ate the barley part, if that was part of the food, if the wheat, if the wheat was something that was consumed, then the leftover water would be mezainis. But since they don't consume the wheat, therefore the leftover water is just a side point. It's not the ikr part of the wheat. It's just a batal dika side point, and if it's a batal dika side point, it's the sweat of the wheat, so to speak, and therefore it is just a shahakal. So therefore, there's a sefer called what was it called again? I forgot what it's called. The old sefer. I wrote it down over here. The sefer Perach Mate Aaron writes. I never heard of it either, but apparently he wrote this in the 1600s, the same time as the Panameris. So the sefer Perach Mate Aaron writes that this is why the bracha on coffee and tea is shahakal, just like by beer, where you don't eat the wheat. So the water is just a side point of it. So therefore the bracha is shahakal. So too by coffee and tea, which you don't eat the coffee grinds. So therefore that liquid is going to be shahakal. Now, the Panameiris counters that is not a good comparison. Why? Because the Rosh's answer of liquid being a minor side point that comes out of the wheat is only true by beer, wheat, which the main purpose that wheat is grown is to make bread, cake, etc. It's not to make beer. That's not the whole function of wheat. So therefore you call the liquid a side point, a tuffle. However, both by tea and by coffee, where the whole point that they grow the coffee bean and the whole point that they grow the tea leaves is to make the liquid, you can't tell me that liquid is the side point. It's all about the liquid. And if it's all about the liquid, it is the ikar pri. And if it's the ikar pri, the bracha should be it's on the coffee. Now the Panameiris concludes that Lamaisa, Lafia Sugya, Lafia Pshat, the bracha on coffee is bari pri ha'etz. However, the minig is shahakal, and he didn't want to go break away from the minig. It sounds like some form of it's minah shemayim or something like that the minig is shahakal. Or maybe once there's been a svara, there is a svara, even though the Panameiris disagrees with the svara. But once there is a svara to say it's shahakal, and that's kind of, I guess, what was muskim of the earlier paiskim, therefore we keep it as shahakal, even though Lamaisa, the Panameiris, says misvara, it should certainly be a eitz. Which brings us to a very interesting question. What about instant coffee? What are we going to say about instant coffee? Because by instant coffee, the way that they manufacture it is, they heat up the coffee beans, right? And they make this very thick mixture. And then they go and grind it up. But a lot of what you're eating is you're actually getting some of the coffee beans you're actually consuming some of the coffee beans in the instant coffee. You're not consuming all the coffee beans, but there's some coffee bean mahus that's going into your coffee. It's not pure extract like it is by brewed coffee. Now, if that's the case, if that's my understanding, I hope I understand it well enough, the process. So one could argue that even the Sefer Petach Mate Aaron doesn't have an argument to say that would be shahakal. But you could say water is the side point when it's only water. But over here, where you actually have some of the beans itself coming into it, it's much harder to say it's a side point. And by instant coffee, there'd be even a greater argument to say by pre-eitz. But l'chayra, the vart of the Panameiris, that he says, the Meisef, the minig is shahakal, we follow shahakal, so l'chayra that would still apply, and l'chayra would still make shahakal. I think it's clear from the Panameiris, we only are able to follow the minhag and go against the svara because shahakal is an all-inclusive bracha that covers no matter what. Meaning, even if the real bracha is supposed to be bari pre-eitz, but shahakal works. If shahakal didn't work, we wouldn't be quick to say we're going to take the minhag on something that doesn't work. But everybody agrees shahakal works, whereas ha'etz, we see there is some area of debate, and therefore the minhag is to make shahakal. One of the nafkaminas is, if you want to be one of those guys, and if you're one of those guys, you know who I'm talking about. If you want to be one of those guys that gets up in public and wants to make a ruckus and say with lots of kavanas, all kavanas tevos, pick up that coffee and make a bayir per eitz and make it and cause a ruckus, l'chayr you're allowed to do that because l'chayr that's the ikar pshat in the sugya.
So in real Turkish coffee, you should be able to make eitz totally.
Yeah.
Turkish coffee like l'chol alma.
Once again, the Padamir is as advising at the end of the day, since the minig is shahakal to follow the minig. There is a Rav Shmuel Shatin who says that you're allowed to make a eitz, and therefore Mr. Wise Guy, the Cheslers of the world, and etc. I hope he hears this. That they want to get up there in public and make a bar per eitz on the top of their lungs on coffee in order to cause a ruckus. L'chayr they could. But the normal, regular guy that wants to know what's the simple, right thing to do, the answer is to make a shahakal. Okay, now let's go weiter. Now that we already made our bracha rishayna on drinking the coffee, let me ask you another question. There's really another bracha maybe we should make before the bracha on drinking the coffee. How about smelling the coffee? Geschmack. Right, we're not allowed to get enough from this world without making a bracha. What about the bracha on smelling coffee? Surely that requires a bracha. So let's get to the point. If one smells coffee inadvertently by mistake, you're walking by a coffee shop and you happen to get a whiff, so there everybody agrees there's no bracha required, no bracha on unintentional smelling. Now if one smells the coffee that he is drinking, he has a cup of coffee in his hand, he's drinking it, and he's also smelling it while he's drinking it, which I think is what happens every time. So no bracha is required because the bracha on smell is relatively less important than taste, and therefore the smelling is bottled to the tasting, and therefore you just make a bracha on the tasting. Now here's where it gets interesting. What if you intentionally smell a coffee that you're not drinking? You pick up a cup, geschmack. Do you require a bracha? So the Mishnah Berurah says you make a bracha. If you're retaining the coffee to smell, you make a bracha. The Chazon Ish says, we'll get there in a second, which bracha. The Chazon Ish says no bracha. The Chazon Ish says since it's a food, no bracha. Now the Pashtus, if you're not a B'nai Braker, we're going to follow the Mishnah Berurah and we will make a bracha. Now, which bracha do you make? So the Pashtus is Hanoisein Reach Toiv Leperis. Because, as I said, the coffee is really a fruit. It's peris. So Hanoisein Reach Toiv Leperis is the bracha. For the record, if you do not remember which bracha to make, you don't remember those words, Hanoisein Reach Toiv Leperis, you could definitely make a Bari Minei B'Samim. Because,
Mine or Atzei?
Mine. Because Bari Minei B'Samim is the shahakal of smells. Bari Minei B'Samim works for everything. Some say that it's minig Ashkenazi to only make Bari Minei B'Samim on everything. Because we're not... We don't know so much. We're not the Sephardi guys at the Kosel with all the different things. We don't know. The Sephardi guys don't know which bracha. We are all asking, Atzei, Isfei, what is it? I don't know yet. So we get very confused on that. So some say that we just make a bar mitzvah with some. L'maisa, we will make it Isfei and Atzei when the Sephardi guy tells us which one is the right one to make. We will make it. Now, we just don't know. But L'maisa, since bar mitzvah works, it's the shahakal of smells, so you could always make that. Now it happens to be, some say that you actually should make a bar minei b'samim and not a shenasim reach toiv leperis on this coffee, because the grounds or the instant coffee isn't edible at this point. Since at this point it's not edible, some say you cannot say hanosim reach toiv leperis on something that's not edible. And therefore, there are shittas that say you make a bar mitzvah some anyways. It seems the pastures of the Mishnah Berurah is to make hanosim reach toiv leperis, but l'maisa you're good whichever way you go. Okay, now next new topic: drinking coffee before chakras. Is one allowed to drink coffee before chakras? So the Shulchan Aruch, Pei Tes Or Chaim Pei Tes Gimel. says that you can't eat or drink before chakras. However, water is allowed. So the simple mashmois of this is you cannot eat and drink before chakras. Water is allowed. Water is allowed, and coffee is not allowed. All other drinks outside of water are not allowed lefi the Shulchan Aruch. Why? So as the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain, because it's an act of gaiva. To first feed yourself, and then daven is the act of gaiva. No, you first daven to Hashem, and then you eat. That's the proper way. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah is going to come with a nice kula, and the Mishnah Berurah is going to say that you can have coffee or tea as well, not just water, but no sugar or milk. Sugar or milk, that's already gaiva. To sit there with your coffee and sugar and milk, gaiva! You can't have gaiva, and therefore you can have coffee or tea without any sugar or milk. Now, the poskim nowadays say that, times have changed, Mr. Berurah. And by the way, Mr. Berurah also points out an interesting thing. If you want to maybe put a piece of sugar in between your lips, which if anybody remembers some old European men when I was growing up, some of these old European men would put a piece of sugar squares, cubes, put them in between their lips and drink a coffee. It's like an old school thing to save money on sugar or something like that. I don't know. Ask them. Actually, those guys aren't alive anymore. Ask your father or grandfather, why they did that back then. But that's what they did. So there's the Mishnah Berurah that, ein limchos. You don't make a macha against the people that want to put the sugar between their lips. But the Mishnah Berurah wasn't even so happy with it. Okay. Because that was like a less gaivadik way of doing it than putting sugar in your coffee. The poskim nowadays say, okay, listen, times have changed. A coffee isn't like this whole amazing, massive gaivadik thing. You drink a coffee to give you a little juice to daven properly, that's God's fine.
Maybe come from that hands.
Oh, no, Taka, we're going to get into that in a second. So, however, what still remains true is a hechsher of a coffee. A hechsher of a coffee is still a problem. So what's a regular coffee and what's a hechsher of a coffee? Well, that depends. If you're somebody that normally, 95% of the coffees that you drink are instant coffee, and once in a while you treat yourself, for you it's a hechsher of a brewed coffee, so if that's who you are, then you shouldn't have a brewed coffee before davening. What about iced coffee? Well, that really depends. If you're in a place or the type of people where iced coffee is a hechsher of a zach, then you shouldn't have iced coffee before davening. That's gaiva to have a hechsher of a zach and then daven. If you're in a place where iced coffee is just the coffee of the summer, but it's nothing specifically hechsher about it, then have it before davening. Cappuccino, frappuccino, something with foam on the top with the ice cream scoop, everything. You have to ask yourself, is this a normal standard 3 coffees a day type situation? Or is this a special hechsher of a coffee, with the ice and the frappuccino and the this and the that? So if you get a coffee from the coffee shop every single day, then for you, a coffee from the coffee shop is not special. But if you're somebody that it's a special thing to get a coffee from the coffee shop, that is special. Each person should be able to judge for themselves what is considered a regular coffee and what is considered a special coffee. Regular coffee, no problem. With sugar and milk, no problem. Special coffee before davening, that is a problem. What about having a coffee during Psukei de Zimra? So, is it a problem? So, one may argue, where does it say anywhere that you can't have a coffee during Psukei de Zimra? And the truth is, it's hard to find anywhere. I can't point to one line of Mishnah Berurah and tell you it says in that line of Mishnah Berurah you're not allowed to have a coffee during Psukei de Zimra. I've seen people do it. Does that make it right? No. I've seen people drive cars on Shabbos as well, and that is not right. So, what is the problem with it? So I think it's a simple kal v'chomer. If having a coffee before davening is very debatable, very questionable, having a coffee with sugar before kal v'chomer, having coffee during davening, that's gaiva. You're a baal gaiva if you have your coffee during davening. Stay away. Don't do it. Not cool. Yeah, I think I understand. As I once heard a Rav giving a shiur on this topic, and he said, A Svardi Chiloni would never have coffee during davening. He doesn't usually davening, but that day that he davens, a Svardi Chiloni would chop that you don't have coffee during davening. And I think there's some emes to that. It's a funny thing. The guy would be Michal Shabbos, but he wouldn't have a coffee during davening because there's a lack of kavod. It's a vardim gaiva. I think it's a funny concept, but I think there's something to it. Okay, let's go weiter. Could you drink coffee with your tefillin on? So I've heard some people say, coffee with your tefillin on, a bizayin. I've heard other people say, what do you mean? Rav Scheinberg did it, the Brisker Rav did it, Rav Shmuel Orbach did it, and going on a list of different gedolim that did it. So what's going on? Bizayin, not bizayin? And I think this is pretty easy to answer. It very much depends on what is tefillin wearing in your life. If you're the guy that doesn't make it past the lane with your tefillin on, so for you, who always doesn't, you put on tefillin only for davening, and you take it off the second after davening or a little bit before that, then for you, it might be a little bit zayin for you to stop and be drinking coffee in your tefillin because that's not what you do with tefillin. But if you're the type of guy that learns before davening with his tefillin, after davening does his shnei mikra or his musaf seder with his tefillin on, you're the type of guy that keeps your tefillin on a little bit, then for you to have a coffee with your tefillin is God's fine, no problem. I think that answers that, and I'm pretty confident with that. Okay, does coffee count as Chamar medina? So what is Chamar medina? So there's Gemara in Shabbos that discusses. Is it Rav Huna or Rav? I think it was Rav Huna, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that. I think it was Rav Huna. Or was it Rav Ashi, maybe? I forget who it was, but one of them, Amoraim, he got to a place, and there was no wine, and he had to make Havdalah. So he said, no wine? Okay, I'll make Havdalah on beer. Chamar medinahu. It is the wine of the place. I guess that place, they didn't have lots of wine around, and the wine of that place was beer. And therefore, one can make kiddush when they don't have wine available. We'll see that little point needs to be discussed. But simply speaking, when they don't have, based on the Shulchan Aruch, when there's no wine available, one can make Shabbos day kiddush or Havdalah on something called Chamar medina, the wine of the place. In that example of the Gemara, it was beer. Okay. Friday night, by the way, just a side point, you don't have wine on Friday night, you make kiddush on the challah itself, you don't use Chamar medina, but Shabbos day or Havdalah, if you don't have wine, you make it on Chamar medina. So what qualifies, what drinks are you allowed to make kiddush on if you do not have wine available? Or we'll see maybe, some of the poskim might say that if you're not down for wine. But let's put that aside. The pashas of the Shulchan Aruch, it has to be no wines available. We'll see, maybe some of the poskim will be a little bit more makel with the you're not down for it. So we have various qualifications. The Rambam says it needs to be what most of the people of the place drink. It has to be what most people drink. The Magen Avraham says it needs to be what most people drink most of the time. I do not know what most of the time means.
Water.
Yeah. Well, most people drink most of the time. I don't know what exactly he's most of the time, but I get what the first part is. Most of the people drink. The Mishnah Berurah says it has to be rogel lishtos, something that's normal to drink. We're getting the idea, right? The Shulchan Aruch says it has to be the drink that you have with the meal. Now I'm going to show some modern day poskim that have requirements that seem to go in the opposite direction. Rav Moshe says it has to be a drink that you would serve to a chashuv, a guest. A drink that you don't just drink when you're thirsty. You'll drink this drink even if you're not thirsty. Rav Elyashiv says that it has to be something that's served at simchas. So, by the way, just without getting into our coffee yet, trying to mekayim the Rav Moshe together with the Magen Avraham and the Shulchan Aruch Harav is very challenging. Because the Magen Avraham and Shulchan Aruch Harav is something that's commonly drunk, whereas the Rav Moshe is something very chashuv, which sounds less common, and you drink it even if you're not thirsty. It's very hard to combine them. I'll give a pshat in a second, but one thing that's very cool is coffee. Because coffee is something that's drunk by most people. Most people drink coffee. You'll drink it even if you're not thirsty. Sure, I do that all the time. And you'll serve it to a hechsher of a guest. You're happy to give a hechsher of a guest the coffee.
He said it's simcha.
Simcha, sure. You go to a bris, a nice bris. Yeah, you're right. You don't serve milchik coffee at fleishik simchas. But that's not because it's a problem with the coffee. It's just we happen not to serve milchiks at fleishik simchas. But if you go to a nice bris, a milchik bris, not a Yerushalmi fleishik bris, but you go to a nice, good American or American living in Eretz Yisrael, Geschmack American, milchik bris, of course there will be coffee. Whether it be brewed or instant, whatever. In America it's taken, it's valid brewed. In Eretz Yisrael it might be instant. But the Maisa is going to be coffee at every bris. So therefore it's definitely served.
And that's a Coke also, no?
Coke also. So we'll see Coke. There's a whole other shayla once we get into Chamar Medina that some place can say that it's just colored water, whatever that means. But whatever, we'll see. I'm not saying I understand this for why Coke is colored water, but sorry. Now back to this. So coffee really checks all the boxes. I just want to know, maybe this was slightly off the point, but it's on the point of Chamar Medina. I had a brilliant shot from Shragi Kalis as to what's going on with Rav Moshe and Rav Elyashiv, really. Because they're really going against all these achronim. All these achronim keep on saying normal, drink normal, 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 normal. And comes along Rav Moshe and says, chashuv, even if you're not thirsty, Rav Elyashiv, serve that as simcha. They're going against all these achronim, like, what's going on? Why are they arguing on all the achronim? So Rav Kalis had a brilliant shot. He said, what is the vart in Chamar Medina? Chamar Medina is the replacement for wine. The way that wine is drunk has changed a lot over the ages. Once upon a time, there was no Coke, and there was no orange juice, and what was there? There was beer and there was wine. You drink wine all the time. Everybody drink wine all the time. You know, beer was a great Chamar Medina because beer was also drink by everybody all the time. Fast forward, and nowadays, do we drink beer? Do we drink wine all the time? No, we do not. It's not normal. If you do, there's something called Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think you should go there. Now, for everybody else, we don't drink wine all the time. So if we don't drink wine all the time, therefore, what do we drink wine? Maybe it's for a hechsher of a guest, maybe by a simcha, something. You drink wine. You don't need to be thirsty to drink wine. That's how wine is drunk nowadays. So too, that's how the Chamar Medina is going to have to fit a new set of criteria, not because the Chamar Medina rules have had some change. Chamar Medina rules mimic wine, and the way that we drink wine has changed. So I thought it was a brilliant shot. Okay, back to us. So coffee for Chamar Medina, it's one of the few things that actually check all the boxes. Now, the Brisker Rav and Rav Chaim Eiser, they went on the record for making Havdalah with coffee. So coffee checks all the boxes, and they actually made it with coffee. Happens to be, there is a shita that it needs to be alcoholic, and the Or Letzion, and Rav Avadia, and the Halachas Ketanas all say that it needs to be alcoholic. However, the Mishnah Brura is pretty clear that it does not need to be alcoholic. So, for the Svardim, the Chayra coffee might be out of the... So, I'll talk about that in a second. So, seemingly, coffee is off the table for Chamar Medina, for the Svardim, but for the Ashkenazim, it's fine. The question is, could you put a little vodka in your coffee, make it alcoholic if you're Svardim? Would that count? So, it's really totally on a point which is debatable. The question is coffee with vodka, is that coffee? Or is that a different drink? Meaning, because we don't drink coffee with vodka all the time. I hope. And since we don't drink coffee with vodka all the time, if you're going to call that like a different category of drink, now it's what do they call a cocktail or something like that, or Irish coffee, is that what they call it? It's probably Scotch actually, Irish coffee. So then it's a different drink, then yes, it got the alcoholic, but it lost everything else. But if you still view it as coffee, it just happens to have some Scotch or vodka or whatever in it, then it would be fine. I assume it's considered a different drink, but I'm not positive on that. Okay, so back to us Ashkenazim that don't need it to be alcoholic. Coffee sounds good. As I said, the Brisker Rav and Chaim Eiser would make Havdalah on coffee. However, as the Brisker Rav notes, it can't be too hot because it needs to be something that you could have Mali Lugma in one shot. So you have to be able to take a nice swig of it in one shot. So after you make the coffee, you have to wait 3 or 4 minutes for it not to be at that point where you have to sip it, unless you're like an old European man and you could sip the boiling hot coffee. Once again, back to the old European man. But for everybody else, you wait 3 or 4 minutes and then you could have Mali Lugma in one shot. It's not a problem. Fine. Now, Rav Shlomo Zalman says that it needs to be hot. It's only considered Chamar medina if the coffee is hot. Now, I'm not so clear if Rav Shlomo Zalman applies now, because Rav Shlomo Zalman was around in the pre-ice coffee era. One could argue, and I think it's true, that iced coffee is also Chamar medina. It's also pretty common. People drink it, definitely in the summer months. And I think one probably could treat iced coffee as Chamar medina. However, I would probably say not that Israeli slushy iced coffee stuff. You know what I'm talking about, what do they call it? The coffee
Blends.
Not the blends. I'm saying the ones with just the ice.
Oh, on the rocks.
On the rest, coffee cara. I don't know what do they call it? Coffee cara, right? The ones, whatever they call it, but not the slushy stuff. The slushy stuff, you might argue, is not exactly a drink. It's like a whole, I don't know what it is. I don't know what, if that's called a drink or not called a drink, or if that, sorry, on the slushy stuff, but on just the coffee with ice style iced coffee, the American style iced coffee, l'chayra, that would be Chamar medina as well. The warm, however, is not pashut. Once it gets to room temperature, is not pashut, that would be considered Chamar medina. It's true that I still drink my coffee once it's warm if I didn't get to it in time. But that's less chashuv of a thing. It's less like a normal standard drink. You don't serve somebody a warm coffee. You only serve somebody a hot coffee, even if they continue to drink it when it's warm. Maskim, that warm is not nearly as pashut. The Brisker Rav, no. The Brisker Rav waited 3 minutes that it wasn't boiling hot. There's a big gap. It's a big gap from not boiling hot that you can still drink it in one shot to when it's warm. There's plenty of time. That's when most of my coffee is drunk. That is when most people drink most of their coffee, is that time period in between when it's not so hot that you could just take little sips, but before it got warm. Because when it's warm, it doesn't taste as good. So that's when we drink our coffees. It sounds like a dachas sticker thing, but it's not dachas. That's when we drink our coffee. So drink your Chamar medina kiddush coffee when we drink coffee. Fine. Now, Rav Nissen Karelitz, the Dirshu breaks down. I don't understand this. I don't know what it means. I'm just gonna throw it out there, but we're not gonna hold this because I don't get it unless it's a misprint or a mistake. Nissen Karelitz says that it's only Chamar medina if it's black, not if it has milk or sugar. I don't know if that's a misprint. I didn't check it out in the Chutshani myself. If that is an accurate quote, sorry, I don't get it. Okay. Now, Ramosha, he actually had a problem with using coffee as Chamar medina. But we only like Ramosha's coolest, not his chumras, right? All right, fine. We'll tell you a chumrah of Ramosha. So Ramosha didn't like this idea of making kiddush on Chamar medina. It's okay making kiddush on Chamar medina, but he didn't like coffee being Chamar medina because he said coffee is just colored water. However, b'shas hadchak, you could do it. So I don't really understand this part. I mean, I saw it around, and we're going to see it. It's discussed in Bishal Akum as well, this concept that coffee is just, it's just water that's colored to give it a little something, but it's really just water. My kasha on that is, no, it's not. I don't want colored water for my, sit down. When I sit down and learn, I don't want no colored water. I want coffee. I don't understand Ramosha. Maybe the person who made Ramosha coffee didn't make him such good coffee. I don't know. Sorry, but whatever. Ramosha said it. I can't discount it, but I don't hear it. And I would say even Ramosha would maybe not say his vart when it comes to instant coffee. Because instant coffee, where you actually get some of the beans in there, to my understanding, so therefore it would be harder to say it's just colored water. The Mechse Elio points out that he has like a little steer. He's like, you can't have it both ways. But Bishul Akam, as we're going to discuss at some point, is you're going to say, oh, it's not Bishul Akam, it's just colored water. And then by Chamar Medina, you're going to say, no, it's a chash of a drink. You can't have it both ways. I hear that. But it's not mukhra, because it could be there's a different way that you judge in Bishul Akam and Chamar Medina. But Lamaisa, I hear what he's saying. Okay, let's get a little controversial. Can I have coffee at Starbucks? Can I have coffee on the plane? Can I have coffee at the rest stop when I'm driving on the highway? You know, I'm not talking about a kosher establishment, a non-kosher establishment. And by the way, just want to throw it out on Starbucks, those things that they call starters or all those other flavored stuff, a lot of this stuff is mamish not kosher. So just because the coffee was cool, maybe. The other starters is like yain, nesach, and oink oink in there, and who knows. You know, stay away. Okay. Nobody ever said that stuff is kosher. Oh, but my chavrus's cousin. Your chavrus's cousin was wrong. Okay. Now, weiter. So Starbucks. Is it kosher? Could I have the coffee in Starbucks? So, there's two issues. One issue is going to be a kashrus issue. The other issue is going to be a bishul akum issue. Let's view them one at a time. Let's start with kashrus. So, they sell in Starbucks oink oink. There's mamish treif. There's mamish yain nesach, mamish treif in Starbucks. By the way, once upon a time when Starbucks opened, it was just coffee. And people started drinking there when it was just coffee. What's wrong with just coffee? Things have changed. So they sell mamish treif, treif kuliyama, bedat tika treif. So halal treif, you know what I'm saying? The works. So, okay, but I'm having regular unflavored coffee. Now it happens to be, I heard from somebody at Star K, there is a chazaka that unflavored coffee is kosher, is always kosher. Chazaka 1. Chazaka number 2, which works in your benefit. They will never make flavored coffee in the unflavored coffee machine, in a major establishment. Not as pashid in the mom and pop gas station on the side of the road, not as pashid, but in a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts or a big establishment, there's definitely a chazaka. They will never put flavored coffee into the unflavored coffee machine because they don't want to mess with the unflavored pure coffeeness. Apparently there is such a chazaka. So that's very helpful. So the unflavored coffee is kosher. Does it have a OU? No. Does it need an OU? No. So that's pretty good. We're off to a good start. Okay, weiter. What could be wrong? Sounds a little good. Well, not so simple. How do they wash those kalim that are used in the production of the unflavored coffee? How do they do it? So they put in the dishwasher, the same dishwasher that they put in the oink oink, that they put in the plates that they served mamish treif on with little remnants of treif. They stick that into the dishwasher, and they stick into the same dishwasher the kalim that are involved in the unflavored coffee. It might depend on exactly the type of coffee machine, what exactly goes in and what exactly doesn't go in. But whatever is detachable and gets washed in a dishwasher will go into that dishwasher. Okay. I've never been inside a operating dishwasher before. However, I'm told that there are two different types of washes. There's two different types of settings. There's a type of setting that starts off with a hot rinse and then goes and adds the soap and etc. There's a different type of setting that starts off with the soap and then adds the hot water, etc. If the dishwasher that we're talking about started off with hot water, we have a problem. Because now this dishwasher is boiling up hot water, which might be Iri Kli Rishon or might be Kli Rishon itself. And it's heating up hot water. It has in this hot water, it's touching the treif kalim, maybe even some treif particles, and the kosher kalim, thereby treifing up the kosher kalim. Not cool. However, if the way that it works is it first spritches soap everywhere before it spritches out the hot water, or maybe it has a cold rinse and then spritches soap and then the hot water, most soaps will create a matzah, a situation which makes the taste that's inside the treif kalim what we call pogum. It takes away the taste, it makes them ineffective, inactive, and therefore that taste is no longer considered not kosher. Now, if that is what happened, then not really a problem, because you didn't get non-kosher taste into my kosher kalim. You got soap pogum taste into my kosher kalim, and that would be okay. Now, when you get to Starbucks, it's going to be a little bit difficult if you want to ask the guy working behind the counter gets minimum wage. How does the cycle of the dishwasher work? Does it first spray the hot water, or does it first spray the soap? I don't think you're going to really get a clear answer from this. I don't think they really know, and you're probably not going to get that information. If you are capable of getting that information, that's a big plus. But I think it's most of the time not going to be such easily accessible information. Okay, so that is a suffix. Assuming you can't access that information, we just created a suffix. Now, next point of information is we have a klal of stam keli ena ben yoima, which means we could assume that a general keli in question wasn't used in the last 24 hours. The significance of that is only a keli which was used in the last 24 hours is able to give over non-kosher taste into a food. As long as we're not dealing with a davar charif, only something that was used in the last 24 hours for treif could give over that taste. If it wasn't used in the last 24 hours, it doesn't mean you're allowed to use it, but it can't give over the treif taste. So it's going to be much, much, much more kuladik. Now, we're generally, when we don't know, we're generally going to assume that something wasn't used in the last 24 hours. However, many question if this klal is applicable when you're dealing with an establishment that is very active and lots going on and things are hectic and they're using a zillion kalim every day. One could argue that in a place like Starbucks, that klal doesn't apply and you assume everything really was used in the last 24 hours because it probably was. So that is a debatable point. Okay, so the Maisa, we have suffix ena ben yoima, we have suffix treif, and we have maybe the ena ben yoima heter. What do we do with that? So the accepted psak is one can use a suffix non-kosher ena ben yoima b'shas tadchak. That's the accepted psak. So if it's b'shas tadchak, you're allowed to use it. If not, not. So what does that mean? You're on the plane and you need a coffee, right? You don't know whether you're in this time zone or that time zone. You want to learn a little bit. You need a coffee. That's b'shas tadchak. Could you have that coffee? Yes. Suffix hat was cleaned. Suffix last 24 hours. Gesundheit, have that coffee. You're on the side of the road. You're driving. You're falling asleep. You need a coffee. Could you have that coffee? B'shas tadchak. Yeah, have that coffee. Now, what about going to Starbucks? Oh, going to Starbucks is another thing. Out of town, you're traveling. Starbucks, you need a coffee. Could you have that coffee? Yeah, you could have that coffee. You're in that hotel in the middle of Yehupitzville, you want a coffee, could you have that coffee? B'shas tadchak? Yeah, you could have that coffee. However, if you're in a frum neighborhood, in a frum area, and there's a Jewish place, a kosher place to get a coffee, but you want to go to Starbucks, it's cheaper. You like the vibe there a little bit more. It's a minute more in your way. There, the pashtus is one should not go to Starbucks to get that coffee. Because that's not considered b'shas tadchak, and if it's not b'shas tadchak, you should not get that coffee. Okay, weiter. Now, Now let's discuss, what about Bishul Akam? There's an Issa D'Rabbanan that you're not allowed to eat food that was cooked by a guy. Now let me ask you a question. That coffee that you're having by Starbucks, on the plane, by the rest stop, who cooked it? It was no Jewish employee, probably. It was a guy. So who cooked your coffee? A guy cooked your coffee. That's Bishul Akam. Uh-oh. Bishul Akam is D'Rabbanan. When you mix, chicken and milk, that's Issa D'Rabbanan. This is also Issa D'Rabbanan. It's called Bishul Akam. So, and this one happens to me because I'll tell you, it leads to intermarriage. So, it's not so cool. So, what's the deal? Bishul Akam. So, how can we get around this? Because it seems pretty gefährlich. It was definitely cooked by a guy. So, I'm going to tell you there's around 8 heterim that I'm going to go through right now. None of them are great heterim. None of them are a blowout heter. None of them simple. None of them is pashut. But there's going to be a lot of them. Number one, there's a shita that there's no isser bishul akam on drinks. The might say we don't paskin like this, but that's one to add to the list. There's a shita, no bishul akam on drinks. Number two, there's a shita that the isser only applies to things that are oila al shulchan malachim l'lafos b'esapas. They have to be something that's eaten with bread. And some want to say that coffee isn't eaten with bread. I have one kasha on that, whoever wanted to say that. I'm not going to call out the names. What? You eat coffee with bread. When you have your bagel, you're not going to have a coffee to drink down that coffee. And furthermore, you might even dip your cake or donut into the coffee. So coffee is eaten with bread, and therefore that one's pretty bad. Okay, number two. There's a rule in Bishul Akam, anything that could be eaten raw, Bishul Akam doesn't apply to that item. So therefore, coffee beans could be eaten raw. And since coffee beans could be eaten raw, there's no Bishul Akam. So this is not pashut, because even though there's some people that munch on coffee beans, let me ask you, could it really be eaten raw? Is that normal? Is it normal? I think it's not normal. I think there's some people that do it, but l'maisa it's not normal. And furthermore, to my understanding, those coffee beans that some people... Oh, but chocolate-covered coffee beans. First of all, chocolate-covered coffee beans is also not normal, in my opinion. But even if you want to say it's not normal, it's because it has chocolate. It's not a raya. Okay, and even those coffee beans that some people munch on, aren't they roasted? So they're not really raw. Okay, but right now it's not a problem because right now... Oh, wait, who roasted it in Guatemala? I don't think it was a Yid. So that doesn't help. Okay, sorry, not so geschmack. Next one, this is actually probably the most quoted one. The coffee is bottled to the water. And water is something that could be drinking raw. So since you could drink water raw, and water is bottled, and the coffee is bottled to the water, therefore Bishul Akam doesn't apply. Which, this is actually the most quoted one, but the kasha is that, really? I mean, it's so chashuv, it's not just the water. And they want to bring a raya from beer, because beer, we see the bracha on beer, as we said previously with shahakal, because it's bottled to the water, so to speak. The water is the main thing. So too, the water is the main thing. Now, we already pointed out that it's not so simple, because since the whole coffee is grown to go into the water coffee drink, therefore it's less simple to say this svar. But that is a svar. And once again, we said that this svar is even less pashut when it comes to instant coffee. Okay, next. It's not really, this one it might be a solid one. It's not really bishul because it's cooked with iroi kli rishon. It's not in a kli rishon itself. Now, just like I told you before, I haven't spent much time inside running dishwashers. I haven't spent so much time inside running coffee machines. And I imagine it depends on which model coffee machine and which type, how exactly it works. Does it work that when the water is cooking up those coffee grinds, we're talking about brewed coffee, when the water is cooking up those coffee grinds, is it already shot out from the heat source? Or is the heat source still heating up the water? Or is it attached, is there hashaka? Is it directly attached with the stream to the heating source or not? I'm guessing that most coffee machines, it's irei klirishan. It's already away from the heating source, is what I assume is what's going on in most coffee machines. But I'm sure there are different types of coffee. I imagine that there are different types of coffee machines, and some of them, the hot water is still connected to the heat source, and some of them, the hot water is no longer connected to the heat source. So this might help, or it may help for some of the machines. And the whole thing, once you get into irei klirishan, is also a whole shayla, because it's not so pashut that there's no bishul akum on irei klirishan, because irei klirishan is mevashal, the outer klipa, the outer shell of the food, the first thing that it comes into contact with. So maybe it's something, but it's what to debate. Next heter is if they serve the coffee without sugar and milk, it's an incomplete product. And if it's an incomplete product, then there's no bishul akum. And the chayra, that's a good heter if it's getting served without sugar or milk, because it is incomplete. However, it's not pashid, because some people drink coffee black without sugar and milk. So if some people drink coffee black without sugar and milk, it's not so simple to say that is a incomplete product. Furthermore, some want to say it doesn't apply because the coffee could be eaten raw. Now, there's different than the coffee bean that I was saying before. If I would take coffee grinds and mix it with below yad lettuce water in halacha, is that considered bishul? No. So if I took this below yad lettuce water and mixed it with the coffee greens and let it sit there, would I get coffee? Yeah. So therefore, it doesn't need bishul. It could be eaten raw. And once it could be eaten raw, so now bishul akum doesn't apply to anything that could be eaten raw. So at first glance, I was very excited when I read this teretz, because I came across it recently, and I thought it was very geschmack. That's really a good answer. Especially nowadays, it's become very common what they call cold brew. In the last couple of years, it's picked up cold brew, which is made just cold water and coffee grinds, and you get coffee. So it's obviously something that doesn't require bishul. But then I realized I didn't really solve the problem. I just pushed it off. Because then all these coffee grinds that we're talking about are stuff that was roasted in Colombia or Guatemala or Arabia, whatever that is, yeah? In Colombia, they roasted these coffee beans. So if these coffee beans were roasted already, so if you tell me they still need to be cooked, so I don't care about the roasting. That's not a bishul akum issue that they roasted the coffee in Colombia over there, because that's not significant. It still needs to be cooked. But once you tell me it doesn't need to be cooked, then the roasting was significant, because you can't just put raw coffee beans, to my knowledge.
But it's still not raw. The food's not ready.
Very good. Very good. No, you're saying very good. You're saying it's true that they did the bishul. But it's just like the coffee without the sugar and the milk. They did the bishul, but it still has another step that's required. Geschmack. I think I'm masking. I think that's very good. That's a very good pshat. Okay, shkoyach. I didn't think about it that way, but I think l'chayra I'm masking. So l'chayra, this last one is probably the favorite of the heterim. It is debatable. It's definitely debatable. But overall, even though none of the explanations are glot, but when you have 8 half terutzim, to me that's enough to say that bishul akum is not a problem. Now, what about those vending machines? Sometimes there are these vending machines which you could order coffee. Could you order a plain coffee? You know, they have all the different types of coffees, but I want to order plain. As we said, plain is kosher. So over there, if they serve non-kosher coffee, you're going to have a problem. Because, no, chal v'akum we'll get into in a second. I'll get to chal v'akum in a second. But I would start off if they have non-kosher coffee. So if they have non-kosher coffee that very likely was used in the last 24 hours, it's going to be very hard to say. I mean, obviously it depends where the coffee machine is. But it's going to be very hard to say within the last 24 hours, this spout that all the coffees come out of wasn't used for any of the flavored coffee. I mean, anybody that put their machine in a place that doesn't get used within 24 hours has put that machine in the wrong place. You know, or if you go to the lounge at a airport lounge and they have those machines that spit out all the different types. No, I assume it wasn't used in the last 24 hours. You look around the lounge, there's like 20 people drinking coffees. Don't tell me you assume that in the last 24 hours it wasn't used. Give me a break. You know? So, if it was used in the last 24 hours for coffee that isn't kosher, you definitely cannot use it for your kosher coffee. That is a problem. Now, what if it's a place that doesn't have flavored coffee? They only have black coffee. They're not black, so they also have with milk, but they don't have flavored. It's coffee with milk, without milk. So therefore, there's no non-kosher coffee. But what about the chalav akum? So if you're not makbid on chalav, Yisrael, you go with Rav Moshe, and let's just keep it simple. We're in a place where Rav Moshe actually said his hechsher. Let's call it America. I don't want to get too controversial in all the other places. But let's say America, where Moshe for sure said his hechsher. Whether it applies nowadays, let's assume it applies nowadays. So, okay, no problem. It's all good. You could get the milk yourself. But let's say you're in a place where, let's say you don't hold the Rav Moshe's hechsher. You're makbid. You're makbid only chalav Yisrael. You don't drink this chalav akum stuff. Do you have to be worried that it was used for chalav akum? So if you write poskim, you do not have to be worried that it was used for chalav akum. Once again, Rav Moshe is enough to be samach on in order that the kelim won't be a problem. And once again, it's not even vade. It's probable. I wouldn't say that it's, I wouldn't even call it an exact suffix. It probably was used for chalav akum in the last 20. But it's not even a idea gemura that it was used for chalav akum. And anyways, you have Rav Moshe, l'chayra, one can be mekel. It looks like we're out of time, and we'll have to take this up next week. Shkach.